New York Times is reporting that Russian men attempting to escape the country following Vladimir Putin's latest call-up are being met at the border and served draft notices. The neighboring country of Georgia says around 10,000 people are seeking entry into its borders each day as the rush to escape continues. The EU border agency says there was a 30% jump last week in the number of Russian citizens who fled the country. According to independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, Russia has seen protests in more than 50 cities, and over 2,300 people have been detained under anti-protest laws. And across Ukraine, supporters of the Kremlin are claiming victory in referendums that most Western observers are calling shams. Russian officials in 4 occupied regions alleged citizens of those areas voted overwhelmingly to cede their homeland to Russia. This sets the stage for Moscow to annex more land from Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, none of Russia's criminal actions will change anything. Willie?
Meanwhile, European officials are investigating unexplained leaks affecting 2 Nord Stream pipelines that bring natural gas from Russia to Europe through the Baltic Sea. Officials say 2 explosions were heard before those leaks started. Europe pointing to possible sabotage amid the energy standoff with Russia provoked by the war in Ukraine. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's a member of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. Senator, thanks for being with us this morning. Let's start there with the Nord Stream pipelines. The Secretary of State Blinken expressed some skepticism, though he didn't call it sabotage. He expressed some skepticism that it was an accident. What are you hearing about those leaks?
Well, Willie, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, has called it sabotage. We don't have definitive intelligence information yet on what caused this subsea pipeline to rupture and to begin to leak methane up into the atmosphere. But it is likely that this is an act by Russia. I think that we've seen over and over Vladimir Putin use energy as a weapon against the West to try and undermine NATO's unity in the face of his brutal invasion of Ukraine. The fake sham referenda that they've been holding in Luhansk and Donetsk, the way that they've had to recruit for their army in prisons and by forcing people fleeing the country to return and to serve demonstrates all the different ways in which his criminal invasion of Ukraine is intensely unpopular. And I think only by continuing to turn off the spigots of power of gas and oil to the West does he have any chance of weakening our resolve. Nonetheless, despite his actions here in Congress, we have a strong bipartisan support for voting for more funding. President Biden has asked for $12 billion more in the bill we will take up at the end of this week, and I believe it'll pass.
As the Russian military continues to flail in Ukraine, we are seeing acts like a nuclear threat last week from Vladimir Putin saying, I'm not bluffing on this. Perhaps if this is sabotage, as the Secretary General says, another act of desperation. As he's backed into a corner, what does that tell you about where he is and about his mindset? How much does that concern you?
I am, of course, concerned that Vladimir Putin is increasingly desperate as there are protests across Russia, as there are actions against military recruitment stations, and as hundreds of thousands of Russian men flee into Finland, Kazakhstan, Georgia to avoid a war that they don't support and in which they're not willing to serve. We should always take seriously his threats to use nuclear weapons, but frankly, we need to push back, as President Biden has, and make it clear that for him to do that would bring a swift and decisive response by NATO, that we refuse to allow him to prevent us from providing the critically needed arms and support that has allowed the Ukrainian military just in the last few weeks to make a dramatic breakout east of Kharkiv and to retake thousands of square miles of Ukrainian territory.
Senator, as the Russian army continues to expose its own weaknesses, and as Putin continues to show that he is in a very, very shaky position in terms of his own country, with people fleeing rather than serving in the army, there's increased talk about potential negotiations between Ukraine and Russia to end this war. My question to you is, why would the Ukrainians cede anything to Russia or Putin right now?
Well, that's right. At this point, President Zelensky has said their goal is to regain all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. And I think the Ukrainian people who've shown such remarkable resiliency and determination, their soldiers who have fought so bravely, expect nothing less. There may come a point where negotiations are the only way for this conflict to resolve. But remember, Ukraine has been at war for 8 years. Ukrainian men and women have volunteered to go to the front in the very easternmost part of Ukraine since 2014. So for many in the West, many Americans, we think of this as a war that's just been going on since February of this year. But for Ukrainians, they've been volunteering and going to serve in the Eastern Front against the Russians now since 2014. I think they expect their inspiring leader, Zelensky, to continue to fight as long as they continue to gain territory.